The next functions are the read EEPROM and write to EEPROM functions. The read one is pretty simple, with just passing in an address and getting the data back. The write to EEPROM is also it's a bit more complex because there's more safety stuff involved, because you really don't want to be writing stuff accidentally to it. So we're passing in an address and a data to be written to the EEPROM. We were mostly given these, but there was an issue here. I believe this line was wrong when we were given it. It was messing with the compiler, but we fixed it. And then we have these functions here to set the pin and to check the pin. These make use of the write to EEPROM and read to EEPROM functions just previously. So when we set it, we pass in a user ID number. That's the number between 0 and 60. And the pin, this is an array of 4 digits, that's for the pin. And then here we calculate the memory address that we're going to use for this user. So we do it user times 4 plus 10. The 10 is is a reserved memory. We don't use these 10. And then we store each pin number on its own memory location. We do the same thing for the reading. And then we check if all of them match. If the data that we read at that memory location is the same as what was passed in, then we return a 1, otherwise we return 0. Now this is the get numerical input function. This is the function that we use to get user input a lot of the time. We pass 3 parameters into it. We pass the number of inputs. This is a number between 0 and 4. So it tells us how many inputs we need from the user. If it's a pin, it'll be 4 because it's 4 numbers, but it could just be a number for the settings menu, in which case it might be just 1 or 2. Echo, we pass 0 into it if we want to echo the user input. Otherwise you can pass in a 1 and it'll output the asterisk character, so useful for pins. And then we decide if we want to allow the carriage return key to be pressed or not. So you would never want someone to press enter while typing in a pin, but you'd want it if they were typing in a number. So we wait for the number of inputs that we've set. We check if they are numerical. If someone presses a key that's a letter instead of a number, it won't do anything. And then we decide what to print, what to echo back. 13 here, that's the carriage return key. We're checking for that one as well. The first time setup function, this is the function we call the first time the system is turned on. So we're going to ask the admin for his pin here, and we're going to call the get numerical function that we just talked about with these parameters. We're going to store it to the EEPROM. We're going to ask the number of users. We're going to check if the number of users is larger than 60. It can never be larger than 60, that's our limit. We're also going to check, we're going to ask for the pin for each of those users. We're going to set the door as waiting for a pin, that is. And we're also going to ask the admin if he wants to change the default settings. If we're going to then call the function, the settings menu, with either a parameter 0 or 1, depending on if he wants to change the settings or not. What that does is, here on the settings menu, the next function, that's an enable parameter, and then if we pass in a 1 or not a 0, it's going to do all of these settings. It's going to ask the admin how long the door should be unlocked for. It's going to ask how long the door should be locked for. It's going to ask what temperature sensor to use for the 7-segment display. It's going to ask how many temperature measurements should be averaged. So the default is 5 measurements, but we can change that. It's going to ask how often to take these measurements. So the default is 5 seconds, but we can change that again. It's going to allow you to change the temperature threshold for the thermal control system. So 20 seconds is the default, but we can change that. It also allows you to change the threshold for the voltage control system between 4 volts for the upper threshold, and that's the default, but we can change that. And the default for the low threshold is 2 volts. But again, and then if instead of 1 it was 0, it would have jumped to here. And then both of these run this bit of code. This is the write to EEPROM. So if you didn't change anything, if the enable was 0, then it would just store the defaults to the EEPROM. If instead you did change the settings, then it'll store those to the EEPROM here. So now the terminal interface control function, it's going to check if the time is the same now as it was the previous time the function was called. If it's the same, it's not going to do anything, it's just going to skip all of this. But if the time is different, that means 1 second has passed, and that's how often we print to the console. So if 1 second's passed, we display the temperature. We call this function to display the temperature to the terminal. Then we check the status of the door. If the door is locked, we're going to tell the user that the door is locked, and we're going to tell him for how long. We're also going to check if the timer is 0, because if it is 0, then we should make the door not locked anymore. We should make it waiting. We're also going to check if the door is locked. This one is locked, this one is unlocked. We're going to tell him, the user, how long the door is unlocked for. Then check if it's 0 again, same thing. If it's neither of those, then we're going to ask him to type a PIN. Now, we're going to check if the door is waiting for user input, and if he types a PIN. Now, if he does, if the PIN is the admin, it's going to ask him if he wants to open the settings menu. If he doesn't, or if it's not a correct PIN, then it's not going to do that. If it is, and it's not the admin, it's going to unlock the door. Now, when we call these functions unlock the door, for example, these are the functions we're calling. So we have a lock door and an unlock door function. What they do is they reset the door timer to whatever value we have stored in this variable. So 60 seconds, maybe we change that. We change the door status to either locked or unlocked, depending which function we call. And we change the physical output of the pins. These two pins here, these are the ones that control the LEDs. So now we have the display temperature terminal function that we used previously. This will go through each of the temperature sensors and just convert them to digits and then output those to the console. It's going to tell you which temperature sensor it is, and then it's going to tell you the temperature value. It's going to tell you which one and then the value. And then the last function is the voltage monitor function. So it's going to measure the analog voltage value. It's going to convert it to something we can use. It's going to check if the voltage value is higher or lower than the thresholds, and then it's going to either output to the output pin or not. Then we're going to check if 1 second's passed, and if it has, then we will output the voltage value to the terminal as well. This is just what outputting to the terminal. And that's the end of the software. We just have the PCB here left that we made, and that's it.